Coogs House, it's Friday, and you know what that means. I've talked myself into a victory. Let's talk about how Houston pulls off the upset.
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougars, daily podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston important teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth. And whether you're a Houston fan or just a hater who came to stop by, thank you for making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. We appreciate making us your first listen each and every day here at Locked On Cougs. If you want to join the conversation, but don't just say, tell us in the comments down below what your favorite kind of apple is as the Houston Cougars are taking on the Kansas State Wildcats from the Little Apple, Manhattan, Kansas this weekend. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. We got more on that one later. But as regulars, the everydayers know, Friday is always the day I've talked myself into a victory. And so we're going to talk through how Houston can get this upset. I also want to talk about what I expect to happen in this game, and furthermore, what the significance of this game is for both Houston and Kansas State. Every week in football, there are big stakes. There just aren't enough games for them not to have anything attached to them. But this weekend, there's a lot on the line. All right, so first things first. I always do this by Friday. If you're new to the show, every single Friday, I talk myself into Houston finding a way to win. I've been right 3 times this year. We won't talk about how many times I've been wrong. So a couple of ways to get the upset here. They got to do 3 things as I see it. One of those is they got to get after the quarterback, Avery Johnson, right? Kansas State quarterback Avery Johnson is an electric athlete. He's running the ball poorly as of late. Less well, I should say, is probably a better phrase than just flat poorly. But we talked to Ryan yesterday some about that. He covers them closely. And so I think he can get rattled a little bit. Kansas State's played a lot worse on the road than at home this season. West Virginia being excluded. And then Kansas is technically a home game for Kansas State this year, but it also is the kind of situation where they're not far enough apart. They're in the same state, alumni and fans everywhere. I'm not sure that it's necessarily a big deal there. To be at home, I should say, is not a big deal in that one. Avery Johnson, I think, is electric an athlete as he is, kind of forget sometimes, is a true sophomore. And in the BYU game, for instance, they had a fumble, and then Avery Johnson threw 2 picks. Colorado game, which was, for a team that Colorado had no Travis Hunter for like most of that game. Game probably should have been a Colorado victory. He had a pick at that one as well. Turning him over, getting after him, getting him frustrated, and making him play a little younger, I think, is a big, big way to keep this game close and competitive and ultimately try and steal it down the stretch. One of the things that has to happen for that, though, is my second point, which is Houston has to not commit turnovers, not just win the turnover battle. Obviously, if you force Avery Johnson to throw a couple and you don't make any stuff, you win the turnover battle. I mean, they can't have a turnover, I don't think. This Kansas State offense has enough going for it. You don't need to give them extra possessions or short fields or anything like that. Houston has 11 turnovers forced this season. Kansas State. I'm sorry, I went backwards. I'm reading the wrong thing. Kansas State has forced 11 turnovers this season. This turnover battle, though, is you go back and forth. You're trying to get Avery Johnson to turn it over and not commit any yourself. It will be fascinating to watch with the weather as they're recording this podcast. There's an 83% chance of rain on Saturday. We'll see what time of day and how heavy and that kind of stuff, how it would really impact this one. On a Houston set of winning the turnover battle, A.J. Halsey has 3 interceptions in the last 3 games. The Houston front 7 has 3 fumble recoveries in his last 3 games as well. Houston's done a really good job of turning people over as of late. I think it's safe to say that they're going to try and make Houston's going to try and make Kansas State the next victim of that. And I think every week you could say win the turnover battle, and I get why people are going to say, like, Parker, that's really cliche. You see the same cliche things every week as far as paths or keys to victory or whatever. But Kansas State being a very run-dominant team with DJ Giddens and when Avery Johnson's good to go, and I think he's obviously going to start, but just if he's his best self or whatever. A run-heavy team only gets better the more they have the ball. And so if you can win the turnover battle and take the ball away from them and also not give them the ball extra times, helps a lot. The other thing is that honestly, that involves occasional fumble luck, right? Houston beat TCU, but Houston recovered 3 of their own fumbles now because the ball just bounced kind of right. You know what I mean? And so, sometimes that it carries more weight, I think, than people realize, right? And so both forcing Avery Johnson, getting after him, etc., and not committing turnovers is really important. The other piece of this is the piece that will probably ruffle the fans of Houston a little bit because I'm asking for something that they're going to tell me will not happen. But a third key to the victory this weekend is that Houston's got to time their explosive plays well, right? Last week against Utah, Houston threw 2 touchdown passes, but only accounted for officially 13 total passes, right? Ultimately, they may not throw more than 17 or 18 this weekend. They probably need to throw more than 14, more than the 13, though, because they want to take some shots, some explosives. Kansas State will send larger blitzes. They will get into 3 deep. They'll get into 1 high. And the key for Houston will be some of the same 3-step concepts where the ball ends up going a long way. So the slant that Manjack caught turned into a touchdown against Utah, right? Just slant fade. And that was the trips on that side. It was a very quick and easy read. Kind of took the blitzes out of it, and ultimately they didn't have enough guys in their secondary, and Cannon was off to the races, right? So I can't. Manjack was off to the races. Sorry, lots going on there. Manjack was off to the races. Now, I also think that you saw it happen on the Boogie Johnson play. Boogie Johnson scores on a wheel route, which had a pick involved in it, but they were in a man under 1 high look. Well, the 1 high can't get out to the wheel route, obviously, and the picking aspect through the corner of the slot corner off. And Boogie Johnson ultimately has the over-the-shoulder touchdown catch on the same kind of thing. Houston needs to time those explosive plays well in this one, and that means sometimes there's a little bit of luck, sometimes a little bit of scouting, whatever the case may be. You need to be like throwing into the blitz, right? Having the right things dialed up or having the right audibles and adjustments made. I've seen more pass-happy offenses, honestly, have receivers alter their routes on the fly if they see a blitz coming inside their inside peripheral. At the college level, it's not that crazy to have that kind of thing going on. Houston, if they're not going to be that flexible on offense, needs to make sure that they're timing things well based on pregame study and what they've seen Kansas State do at different times. Right. This ultimately, though, does fall on Kevin Barbay's play calling more so than any individual player. And I know from the comments that people maybe aren't his biggest fan in his 8 games at Houston. I do think, however, that ultimately, if we're trying to find like things to take out of this game or do well in this game, one of them has to be, if you're trying to win the football game, has to be to make sure you're taking your shots at the appropriate time. I want to talk some about what I expect in this game and kind of what could be coming next for Houston down the road, I should say, in terms of the significance of this game. But first, Saturday could be a long day. And Saturday's a long day for you, as every day seems to be for me these days. You're going to need a 5-hour energy pick-me-up because folks over at 5-Hour Energy know that being a passionate football fan is not just a hobby, it's a way of life. And it takes a lot of energy to power through these all-day tailgates, touchdowns, or agonizing second overtime, triple overtime, etc. Right? Five Energy is going to have all the things you need. I'm a teacher. I'm a coach. I do this podcast. I watch all the stuff on Houston all the time. I need 5 Energy every single day, like right after lunch. A little pick me up, gets me on through the day. And again, it lasts me more than 5 hours, if I'm being really honest with you. If you want to, get in on the action yourself, you can go to 5hourenergy.com. 5-Hour Energy knows that no matter what team you root for, being a fan requires heart, soul, and a whole lot of energy. Whether you're prepping for the big tailgate or ironing your jersey, your game day to-do list is always a mile long. That's why the limited edition Stay in the Fan 5-Hour Energy shot is here to keep you fueled throughout the season. What's your fuel this week? Whatever it is, do it with 5-Hour Energy. Available on 5hourenergy.com, shipped nationwide. Parker Ainsworth, Locked On Cougs, breaking down Houston and Kansas State this weekend. And the second segment, if the first segment is me being optimistic, the second segment is me being still optimistic, but less so and a little bit more realistic. And that is to say, what do I expect to happen in this game? I feel very, very firmly that Houston and Kansas State's going to feel a lot like Houston and another opponent from earlier this year. It's going to feel like an identical kind of game. Obviously, Kansas State being ranked 17th in the country means that they're fairly well respected. But I think we've kind of seen the country shift and throw some respect to these other guys' way as well, and that's Iowa State. When Houston played Iowa State, the score was 3-0 with about 3.5 minutes left in the third quarter. Iowa State scored. Houston turned the ball over on the third play of offense. Iowa State scored again. Right, that was the ball game. That was all it took. And while I don't necessarily think that has to be the outcome, I do think that the game script will feel fairly similar. Houston, I feel like, will keep this thing close for a long time defensively, right? Defense is pretty strong. It's done its good job against other teams for the majority of the game. Obviously, with different lapses at different points at the end because they're on the field for so much. I do think, though, that ultimately the things that Houston did well for almost 3 full quarters of the Iowa State game, I anticipate them doing well again in this one, right? Defense has played well at home this year. If you take out Kansas, which is a road game for Houston, and you take out the other game I was going to say to take out was Cincinnati. Cincinnati was one that I clearly don't want to think about too terribly much, but I think this game's going to be like the Iowa State game in that Houston keeps close that late. The difference has to be, though, that the offense can't just flat no-show like they did against Iowa State, right? Iowa State scored like 3 plays later. Houston fumbled. Iowa State got the ball and scored again, right? That level of response is not really going to work very well for the Houston Cougars this weekend. They're going to have a little bit more of an elevated response and, frankly, a little bit sharper response to whatever the case may be as far as why they're falling behind the 8 ball a little bit. Now, with Iowa State, it was Houston fumbling, a turnover by whomever at that point in the game, the late 30th, early 4th, could be dramatically more impactful in this game. And I expect it to be a game both because, again, it's an 83% chance of rain on an 82-degree day as I'm reading things right now off the weather app. And also because I fully expect that it's just what both – I expect this because it's what both teams do well. I think both teams are going to run the ball a lot in this game. And so things I expect to see are a balanced set of backs for Houston. Houston's finally kind of figuring out who can do what between Rashawn and Jamarian and Stacy and so on, right? And so Houston dialing those kinds of things up to be the right thing is going to be important as well. Making sure you get in the end zone when you've got to is going to be important because there are many times you just got to get some points to stay in this kind of a game. Kansas State did push Houston last year, and they pushed them all over the field, up and down, all kinds of around in a blowout kind of a game. Unless Houston cannot put the ball in the end zone late, I kind of feel like this just won't be anything like that. And I know that people are skittish because it's the same uniform and same head coach. It's a lot different Kansas State team. They did win the Big 12 2 years ago, but their own offense has been dramatically changed by the change at quarterback. And ultimately, that kind of leads me to believe that Houston defense really will make this a little bit different feeling game. Another thing I expect in this game is I expect Houston to get turnovers. They've done that a lot more intentionally lately. The question will be, can they keep their own clean sheet in this game? I also, for what's worth, if I'm looking at things that I expect to see happen, I expect to see Zion Chris a little bit more settled in, a little bit more expansion in the playbook, and a little bit more open in what's going to happen in this game. Ultimately, Zion did not project to come in as a starter, and then when Donovan came in as he came in, things kind of had to get fast forwarded a little bit. Week to week, I anticipate them being able to add things slowly. And that does mean that Zion should have more on his plate this week than he did last, even if it's not as much on his plate as he'll have in a month or next fall, right? And so I think that's all important perspective to keep in mind in this one. Other things I expect to see happen. Well, I'm trying to think how to articulate this. I think Michael Batten is going to spend a lot of time in the Kansas State backfield, but not like in the deepest part of the backfield, chasing around running backs and stuff like that, but kind of like at the heels of the offensive lineman level, back of the offensive lineman / in that area of the field, right? Because in doing that, I think Houston's going to send, like we would have called it, a blitz and spy, right, where he attacks a gap and crosses the line because it's hard to block Michael Batten. And then ultimately, once he gets there, he kind of has a lot of things going on. But he also, for what it's worth, he also has to keep a spy on Avery Johnson there, right? And kind of make sure he's tracking him as he goes side to side or whatever. I think that's kind of the low-hanging spy with the higher spy behind him and AJ Halsey, because the higher spy is also functionally a whole player playing in that part of the coverage. I think that's the primary thing I'd expect to see out of the Houston Cougars this weekend if they're trying to take advantage of the Kansas State Wildcats. I could also see a more traditional alignment at the start of the play, and then ultimately AJ Halsey falling into that idea of a spy of the quarterback and things like that. I think Halsey's got to have a big game out there, not just because he had 2 picks a couple weeks ago and a pick last week and all that, but because truthfully, he's an impact kind of athlete that plays in a way and in a spot where if he's going to be involved in the game, there's no way around the fact that he's going to be very, very important and crucial to what Houston's doing on the defensive side of the ball. So a lot of different things I expect to see happening this weekend as Houston plays host to Kansas State. But I want to talk about what the significance of this weekend is for both programs. I think that honestly, both programs benefit greatly from winning this football game, and that might not quite be as obvious to you as it should be, but we're going to get there. But first, America's number one sports book is FanDuel. FanDuel's got all kinds of great things going on right now, but my favorite, the one you got to check out, is that you can get just put $5 down, win a bet, get $150 in bonus bets if you win the contest. The FanDuel Sportsbook gives you everything you need to make place bets on the NFL all in one place. If you get a hunch, if you want to check out your latest stats, if you play-by-play of other games, whatever you want to do, you can do it at the page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com. We'll get started with $150 in bonus bets you can win with your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make the most out of every moment with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Parker Ranger, the Locked On Cougs, you're bringing in all things Houston Cougars. We've talked about a upset in the first segment that could be brewing. Second segment, what to expect and why I think it could be close down the stretch. But third and final segment here is looking at the significance of this game for both teams. Now let's start with Kansas State because I think it's a little more obvious and probably the thing that more national audience understands. It also, for what's worth, is why I think Houston is up for a Kansas State team that is playing very hard. Kansas State has to win this football game, right? They got the Holy War in a couple weeks, and they got to win that as well. But aside from a Houston win this weekend, they've got a win at Oklahoma State, but everyone beat them there. And they have an early September win over Arizona, which is a little bit different as well, right? Just because Arizona's kind of had their own falling off of things. As I look at this across the board, I see, frankly, I see a team that is looking like they want to be in the college football playoff in Kansas State. I think Kansas State wants to be in Arlington playing the Big 12 title game. But their schedule almost makes you think or wonder if they can do anything or make any noise when they get there. Yes, they're only a one-loss team. They haven't played a whole lot of other ranked opponents across the board. This would help elevate that if they put on some sort of a show, but it also serves as a win in a playoff game type of scenario for them because I don't think they get in with 2 losses. Now, what this means for Houston, right, is a chance to dramatically shift everything we've grown to understand about this season. Houston through 8 games is 3-5. That's a game out of 500, right? That's not that crazy to think that Houston could be 500 if one ball bounced a little bit different in the Oklahoma game or something like that, right? And I mentioned earlier in the week in taking perspective that if you'd have told me that 8 games in the season, Houston's Willie Fritz-led team would be in like the middle third of the Big 12, I think that I'd have probably given you a big hug. Now I know that's part of that is because the Big 12 was cannibalizing each other like it did last year, but in the last 2 years actually. But I do think that it's also because ultimately, right, as the as the Big 12 standings continue to unfold, some of these games are going to get decided and change some of that order up and back and forth. I also think, though, that Houston fans are quick to be critical of the staff amidst this rebuild. And I get wanting instantaneous results and light switches and so on. That doesn't mean it always quite happens like that. It's just not necessarily realistic, right? Now, the line has been 12.5 as of late. It opened up this week at 10.5 in favor of the Kansas State Wildcats. Present tense is 12.5 points. And I before I get into more on the significance of this game, I guess that strikes me as interesting because I don't know if the teams have that big a chasm between them. I'm skeptical about making any double-digit spread bet in the Big 12. I just don't know that I can do it. Now, back to the significance of this game. As we look at what's on the line for the Cougs, right? We talk about if they win, they'll have the 4 wins as they did last year, and that's a big deal. They also have a really good shot at a bowl game if they win. If they win this one, so Houston hosts Kansas State this weekend. They're at Arizona next weekend. I think we all thought that was more difficult than it is. And then Houston hosts Baylor after that. If you're looking across those games, both Arizona and Baylor have had kind of rough years at times. I guess Baylor's had a hot couple weeks here as of late. Those are both winnable games. Well, again, I'm not great at math, but if you win against Kansas State, you have 4. And then if you win against Arizona, you've got 5. And if you win against Baylor, you would have 6. And 6 is really important in getting into a bowl game. A bowl game is not just the prestige of saying we got to such bowl, although fans do like playing that card. In building a program, a Pro Bowl is another month of practice you're working with your kids in a way that is different than off-season things are, even at the high major Division I level, right? I'm not saying my expectation is necessarily that Houston is in a bowl game. I don't think I'm ready to pass that on yet. I do think, though, that ultimately you're going to see Houston fighting as if this is kind of a playoff game themselves, because Houston could end up in a bowl because of this game, right? And so it'll be interesting to see how this plays out, if that leads to trick plays and this, that, and the other thing. I also think, for what it's worth, that while Arizona and Baylor are both very beatable teams, if Houston's other two games left are Kansas State and BYU, well, I admit that my Kansas State people keep telling that one was fluky, but it feels like that's a much different game for Houston than BYU will be. It's also the home game out of those two. You got to go to BYU at the end of the season. If you were going to try and get 6 wins, you almost have to have the Kansas State game under your belt. Now, I do think there's a lot going on with this one. If you've got questions, comments, concerns, if you want to talk about it, we here on X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it, at Painsworth512. Leave comments in the show notes as well down below. As far as the live post-game show goes, it's going to be a little bit different. The afternoon game plus my coaching stuff is going to throw things off a little bit. I'll make sure I get to see every single bit before talking about it on Saturday night. But I imagine we're looking at a Cougars After Dark situation where Houston finishes early in the day. We'll watch some more Big 12 games. We talk about Houston and the Big 12 later in the day. So keep your bell notifications on for that one. We get more details to you over the weekend. Locked On Cougs is a proud member of the Locked On Podcast Network. That means your team every day. Go Cougs.